Joining me now, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Emeritus, Michael McCaul. Good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start there in Russia. These strikes continue back and forth. Ukraine pulling off this huge surprise drone attack. Russia responding as we expected they would. There are growing questions about whether Putin wants peace. I know that you don't think that he does. Politico magazine has this assessment. They say Putin will never abandon his ambition of conquering Ukraine, and convincing him to do so shouldn't be the aim of Ukraine's global supporters. You can't make Putin walk away from Ukraine. You have to put Ukraine out of his reach. Do you agree, and how do we do that?
You know, I do. I think we have to be clear-eyed as to who Mr. Putin is. He has not come to the negotiating table. He's not called for a ceasefire like Zelensky. And if you look at the targets that were hit by Ukraine, these were the bombers that carry the cruise missiles, the very targets that would kill civilians in Ukraine, as opposed to what are Putin's targets, right? Apartment complex buildings, schools, maternity hospitals and churches. Killing civilians is it's a criminal act, actually, according to the Geneva Convention. So it's a very different playing field. How do we get them to the table, though? I do think we need a negotiated settlement. We cannot, we're not going to have a storm to Berlin like World War II, unconditional surrender. So you have to put pressure. How do you do that? Secondary sanctions. Lindsey Graham has a bill. If he passes it tomorrow, we'll pass it in the House. And secondly, keep the flow of weapons going into Ukraine to pressure Mr. Putin to act in good faith. I have little confidence in him.
Well, what happened with those drone strikes, though, is raising a lot of questions more broadly about, when an adversary gets creative, could we be worrying about the same thing here in the U.S.? It took them 18 months to plan that. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says this: Americans are accustomed to wars fought far from home by a force of volunteers, but everyone in the U.S., they predict, will be on the front lines of the next conflict. Ukraine did the U.S. a favor by destroying bombers of a U.S. adversary and sending America a wake-up call about its own complacency. Are you worried about one of our enemies being able to pull off something similar on U.S. soil?
I think what we saw take place was a mastermind counteroffensive. It was a seismic change in modern warfare technology, where you can take a very inexpensive little drone and take out a very expensive big bomber that drops cruise missiles. I mean, it changes everything on its head. And I know the Pentagon's looking at this from the standpoint of how can we defend to do this? We don't have the countermeasures to block these UAVs, and we need to develop those because that will be the future of warfare.
So you're worried that our military bases, our bombers are open to this kind of attack? I
think, we're seeing more and more drones in the air, thousands of them, now millions. This will be what the terrorists use. This will be what adversarial nations are going to use. And I think the Pentagon, as we pass a reconciliation, the money has to go towards these more modern warfare technologies, not to these old, ships that, are just a remnant of World War II, kind of the dinosaurs. Sure, we need some of those, but we got to be focused on the AI technology.
Okay, so let's talk about Iran, because we've got talks going on with them as well. There have been news outlets who have said there was some level of enrichment, that we offered a deal. President Trump, you saw him there saying, no way, there's not going to be any enrichment. He wants to get a deal done. He said that diplomatically numerous times. But you heard him there in Lucas reporting, him saying, we may have to do it the other way. What is that other way? What are the other options?
Well, just with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the Middle East, I had a very intense conversation with him. He has little confidence that this deal is going to get reached, and I agree with them. They always delay. Trump says zero enrichment. He's right about that, because if they have enrichment, they get a bomb. So, I think you have to give the diplomats a chance, right? And then when diplomacy breaks down, you have war. There's no question in my mind coming out of that meeting what Mr. Netanyahu's intentions are, and that is to strike Iran when the negotiations go bad. The question is going to be, what will be the United States' role, but also coordinating with the United States, our allies and partners in the region, because remember, the retaliation from Iran will be severe, and we have a lot of troops there, U.S. citizens there. They'll hit Jordan, they'll hit Saudi Arabia, and they'll hit Israel. And we are the only country, along with Israel, that can stop all this from coming in. Israel just can't do this alone.
Well, what would our role be? And would it be something that would require congressional authorization?
Well, we have the AUMF, so the president's he can conduct limited military actions for a certain period of time. Then the authorized use of military forces kicked in. Then it comes to the Foreign Affairs Committee, where we will deliberate that. I don't think the president takes this decision lightly. That will be his decision, but I think we cannot accept Iran to have a nuclear bomb. And therefore, you know, had we gone with the JCPOA 12 years ago, Iran would have an atomic bomb today. And I'm so glad we stopped that when we did. But what I told Mr. Netanyahu was, you know, they sent an emissary to the president. That's his decision. But at least coordinate with us if you go alone to respond to the retaliation coming out of Iran.
I want to make sure before you go that we ask you about one domestic issue. This has to do with Kilmer Obrego Garcia. He entered the country illegally through your state of Texas, was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. He's back now facing a slew of criminal charges and allegations that he was trafficking humans, drugs, weapons, you know, gang members, all that kind of stuff. Senator Chris Van Hollen says that he is back because of demands that the Trump administration comply with court orders that Obrego Garcia's due process and constitutional rights were being violated. You two once served in the House together. What do you make of his assessment? Because he's calling this a victory for the rule of law.
Well, like, I mean, the Supreme Court had its order. He was returned to the United States. But now it's time for our justice, and that is, who is this man? For 20 years, he had a smuggling operation, including smuggling MS-13 gang members, according to the indictment when he came back in. I would argue, Tim, you're probably better off in El Salvador than facing these kind of charges. And this is precisely the case that Donald Trump ran on, that got him a mandate from the American people. They're tired of seeing this. And what I'm amazed at, and I saw it at our hearing with Secretary Noem, is seeing the Democrats hold Mr. Garcia up as if he's some golden boy, poster child that they all rally behind, when he's in fact related to MS-13, a trafficker. He beats his wife. I mean, it's hardly a model for the Democratic Party. I think they're making a terrible mistake politically, and we saw that play out in the last election.
Yeah, well, a lot of allegations against him. He now heads to trial at some point, and we will watch that case to see what his ultimate disposition is by the law. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in today.
Always, thanks, Ian.